one of my favorite, one of the analysts that I listen to quite regularly now is in fact a former Trumper, Anthony Scaramucci. Remember him, the Mooch. He was Trump's press secretary for 11 days in 2000, well, when he entered office in 2017. He was only part of the Trump administration for 11 days, then was kicked out. So now he's become quite a entertaining source of background information. And he always says, follow what Donald Trump does and not what he says, because a lot what he says is in fact rubbish. It is in fact shots across the bow. It is tests of loyalty. So even though 100 executive orders signed yesterday, Anthony Scaramucci says half of them actually mean nothing. Sanusha Naidu is with the Institute for Global Dialogue. You must watch the US presidential inauguration speech because it has an impact on geopolitics. Let's start with something that is quite trivial, but also in one of the examples of what Anthony Scaramucci says, follow what Donald Trump does and not what he says. What he said yesterday was one of the things. He's going to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. It's now called, according to Donald Trump, the Gulf of America. It means absolutely nothing, does it?
Yeah, good morning, Lester. Good morning to your listeners. I mean, it's a difficult one, right? So you can actually shoot from the hip, but it takes a while to make these changes stick. And he did a lot of things yesterday. I think he came out signing so many executive orders. He's been pushing on the question of birthright and citizenship. And so all of these things kind of make one think to a large extent, how much of it is real, how much of it is transactional, and how much of it is going to actually find traction in the context. I mean, that it is. But I think one of the areas that really would be part of the geopolitics, particularly around the UN, is the issue around the WHO, the World Health Organization, which was one of the executive orders he signed, which is based on how much of money the U.S. contributes to the WHO, which in Donald Trump's universe, it doesn't make sense because China contributes far less and the U.S. contributes far more, and it just doesn't make sense in his mind around the per capita income, in other words, based on population and size and so forth. But that does have ripple effects because then who's gonna actually stand up and fit the deficit of the WHO?
Having a Republican or a Democrat president in the White House has always affected, or at least in the last 2 decades, has affected public health, particularly in Africa. When we talk about George W. Bush's PEPFAR, Presidential Emergency Plan for Emergency Aid Relief, there is a clause there, what's called the Mexico Protocol, that when there's a Democratic president, then they allow for spending on educational health messages like termination as presidency as an option for reproductive health. When there's a Republican president, they then close that pipeline, saying, you want our money, then no word on termination as a reproductive health option. And I just think a Trump presidency ups that ante, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, it's almost interesting to note that this is also part of a fail-safe measure. I mean, it comes across as very important that these global health initiatives, and in particular in the African context, play such a critical role in addressing the health weaknesses and infrastructure and other interventions in the African context. But with these clauses, you kind of have that kind of overreach in terms of the independence of the health systems in Africa, despite its link back to U.S. financing. And one of the things that he has actually signed as well, I think, or has made mention of, is that there's going to be a freeze on foreign aid assistance. So in other words, this is also part of that. So yeah, it's going to be interesting times. But I think what we need to also bear in mind is that, the Donald Trump presidency should not be seen as a surprise. It's not something that catches us out in left field. We should start thinking about how do we start moving and building our own infrastructure. The idea that you need to depend on another presidency and what that presidency does and how that impacts. Yes, it's going to have implications for big global governance reform agendas and institutions and so forth. But it means that other countries now can step up and fit that void. And so African countries need to start thinking much more critically about how they want to pursue their own international relations and use their resources more productively in terms of industrialization and keeping money at home and not necessarily investing it in offshore accounts.
Plenty of competing messages in Donald Trump's speech. At one point, he's saying he wants to be isolationist. He doesn't want to involve the U.S. in any foreign conflicts. But at the same time, he wants to be expansionist. He wants to seize control of Panama, of Greenland, joking about Canada as being the 51st state. Also, when it comes to other things, Elon Musk now is his partner in government. Elon Musk, who has built an empire on what? Tesla vehicles, electric vehicles. At the same time, Donald Trump says no to the moratorium on gas guzzling vehicles. Is shutting down the pipeline for EVs. So he does talk from both sides of his mouth in many ways.
Yeah, and I think it circles back to your point you made in the introduction to this conversation about not listen to what he says, but follow what he does. And I think that's going to be the uncertainty of the Donald Trump presidency, is that he's also made statements around, you talk about Panama, you talk about the Gulf of Mexico being renamed the Gulf of America, but he's also been asked in signing those executive orders. He was asked about the Middle East, he was asked about Gaza, he was asked about the conflict, and he said he's not confident, and it's not his conflict. So again, these are the dynamics, I think, that things that are closer to home, whether he's isolationist or whether he's expansionist, it'll be probably more regional and look at that in that context. But it does seem to me that what you are going to be seeing is America that in many ways is going to be difficult for itself to navigate its own destiny going forward.
Sanusha Naidu, Institute for Global Dialogue.